Hey everybody, welcome to Rising Nomad. My name is Erik, and in this video we're going to discuss, is the digital nomad movement a sort of neocolonialism? Now this is thrown around a lot. There's criticisms of what digital nomads are doing to communities around the world that they inhabit. And today I've got Shaun, who is an anthropologist doing a doctorate degree in digital nomadism at the University of Melbourne in Australia. How's it going, Shaun?
Good, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well, and I'm just living my, whatever lifestyle, whatever you want to call it. But how would you categorize colonialism historically?
So colonialism historically has been, when one group of people with more power, more resources come into a space and effectively take it over, use the space in order to serve their own ends. So that's, I think, the basic definition of colonialism. In regards to, whether digital nomadism is a form of neocolonialism, well, what are we doing? We're coming into spaces, we're taking them over, we're using them for, using the space for its cheap cost of living. We are also kind of, a lot of the space as well in these places starts to cater towards us. So cafes, so instead of like an old, fruit and veg shop that's been in the town or the village for years or generations, now that's suddenly turned into a cafe to appeal to us. So, whether digital nomadism is a form of neocolonialism, well, we're coming in and we're taking over, effectively.
Are we taking over though? Because I haven't heard of any cases where the population of digital nomads has actually reached a saturation point to the point where the actual governments are being taken over by the foreign population of digital nomads. And I don't really see that on the horizon. I mean, people are not really, so they're starting their own businesses and making their own community structures as, mobile communities around the world always do, whether it's people moving from one continent to another or people moving from one side of a country to another. But we haven't really gotten to the point, is this just early days, or is there going to be a point where actually we are taking over the governments in the places, or maybe governments are just made weaker and weaker by international people? I mean, that's the key difference that I sort of see, because when you look at colonialism, it's kind of like people from Europe going to other countries in the world and saying, hey, we've got a better system of how you can run your country, and we're going to put that in and essentially be your government. That's a key difference, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. I don't think digital nomads are taking over in the sense of outnumbering or kind of having more political power than the locals, but just in terms of economic power. We have way more economic power. For example, Westerners coming into Indonesia, Thailand, have way more economic power. And now, and the economy, you think about the state is based on the economy. So if the economy needs something, or if the economy can capitalize off these people, then the economy is going to start to cater towards those people. So what you might find happening is that space has become, and this kind of goes back to my last point, tailored towards this kind of small group of people that have more kind of money and resources than towards the local population, and that's I think a bit concerning.
But it's still very small compared to, if you go to Thailand, there's some hotspots for sure, Chiang Mai, here in Koh Phangan, etc. But I don't see it reaching the point yet where it's actually threatening the local economic, political power structure. It could in the future, but I don't really see that point. And furthermore, you see a trend around the world where governments actually are trying to attract specifically wealthy digital nomads to come to their country. They look at their economic, and they want foreign investment. They want rich people from other countries, millionaires, billionaires, so on and so forth, to move to their countries. So on one hand, I see governments sort of encouraging it. On the other hand, I see them discouraging people who don't have money, like people who maybe have the same amount of money as the local people, like a backpacker budget or something like that. They don't seem to want to attract that. They want to attract the people who are actually going to come and invest in their country. So what does that look like from your perspective? I mean, it's almost encouraged, isn't it?
Yeah, like it's. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's definitely a lot of benefits to nomad communities or nomadic people coming into a place like Thailand and kind of almost revitalizing the economy and giving creating jobs and stuff for locals. So it's not like a black and white thing where it's bad or good, but I think there is some kind of concern with people being displaced. Like you look at Lisbon and even Mexico City and Barcelona, local people are being displaced by foreign remote workers and digital nomads. So,
and specifically Airbnb is the hot topic and accommodation is the hot topic. Yeah.
There's always going to be, there's always going to be winners and losers. There's going to be people that will benefit from people coming in, and there's going to be people that are going to kind of not benefit. And usually it's the people that have less resources, less capital, that are going to suffer the most, and people with a bit more money, a bit more resources are going to maybe be able to capitalize on them.
Yeah, so this is something, gentrification, that has been happening for a long time in large metropolitan centers around the Western world, where you would just have people moving further and further out of the city center, and they tend to like these. Usually how it starts is like a working class area attracts artists for the cheap rent, and then it creates a sort of cultural scene that's palatable for people to want to move into, and then once that happens, it attracts investment and sort of projects that cater to more affluent people, and then next thing you know, the working class people who originally it was their neighborhood, they can barely afford to live there, and those that were renting are pushed out. I mean, it can be good for those who actually manage to own their own property and stuff like that, because they can maybe move and get a good buyout for their property and stuff like that. But it's something that was happening like sort of like in East London, East End Toronto, and like Queens, New York, Brooklyn, all this sort of stuff, all these places for the last decades. And I was kind of like, I saw this coming from about 2007. No, it's going to be Eastern Europe. It's going to be remote working, and it's Eastern Europe, and it's Southeast Asia and Latin America are going to be the next frontiers once people don't have to commute to offices anymore. And so that's happening now. And it's a very tricky thing to deal with, because you can't really stop it. I know the city of Lisbon has now said that they will not allow any new Airbnbs in their city, but that just means that probably a bunch of agencies will pop up for rentals that are beyond the visibility of the government. Airbnb, it can be very visible to the government, but if you have just small agencies in neighborhoods where people can just walk in and say, hey, I want to pay twice the average, 3 times the average rental price and stay for 1 month, what can you do for me? It's just pushing it underground. And like, yeah. It's been happening for a long time on a sort of national or metropolitan level, and now it's happening on an international level. What are the benefits? Because I mean, economically, you kind of have to cater to that. If you want to get some of that cash, you want to cater to the digital nomads, serve food to their taste and stuff like that. But I see people around here who are locals who manage to do that and actually make really good livings, really good businesses, and actually are breaking out of an economic cycle of working with population they can't afford, and they become affluent through that. So, I mean, it's a globalization in a new order of sort of micro. Sort of small scale stuff happening. It's not just because globalization used to always mean big corporations coming into your country and opening up a Walmart or whatever and giving the local population jobs which are slightly better than the local wages and stuff like that. But now it's happening it's like, I feel that this one now, actually everybody can have a chance, and it's much more sincere. Like a bunch of people coming because they like an island in the Gulf of Thailand versus big corporations who just come in. I mean, it's much more person to person. It's much more what the internet always does is has a leveling effect in some way. Well, you get big corporations by Google, like Google and Facebook. it also gives a lot of people with small businesses the chance to run their own advertising businesses and get a piece of that. So is it just another case of kind of like, if you don't get with the times, you're going to be wiped out naturally, if you just think that you can continue to run your business, your life in the same way? Or is it something like, what could governments do to make it more fair, like the Lisbon example?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I agree with pretty much everything you've said. It's kind of it's following the trajectory of globalization.
Yeah.
So gentrification is kind of globalization. Well, the fact that it's happening now in different countries, so the transnational aspect of the gentrification, I think is really, really interesting and quite new. I do think that, like some people though, when you say it's more sincere, yeah, like maybe in a place like Copenhagen, it is more sincere. Like people come here because they actually love the place and they want to kind of get involved in the community. But there are also a lot of places that nomads will go to, remote workers will go to, just because it's cheap, without any real interest in the local culture and the local customs, and it's just kind of like a space where they can try out a business idea because the costs are relatively low. I also think, I sometimes think of digital nomads as kind of like mini transnational corporations. So you think of a transnational corporation, they would set up shop wherever it would be best for them. So wherever they could get cheaper resources or cheaper labor. And nomads are kind of doing that as well. They're kind of going somewhere that's has a lower cost of living for them, so they can kind of, carry out their business or whatever. So they're kind of like moving transnational corporations. What governments can do, I mean, it's difficult as well because, in a country like Thailand, we don't really know how much, if we, for example, if we were to pay taxes to Thailand, as nomads would pay taxes, there's always that concern in certain countries where there's maybe levels of corruption. People are like, well, I don't really want to pay any money to the government because I don't really know if that's actually going to go to the people themselves. Yeah. So there's that kind of that concern, but I'm not sure. Like it's a very complicated issue, and there are winners and losers on both sides. And but
and it's inevitable. Like
it's inevitable. It is inevitable.
And so we have to deal with this world that we're living in, and I think that, my sort of perspective on it is there should be more community initiatives to include the locals in what's happening. Meaning the government could sponsor stuff like that. Because it's the biggest wall I see between digital nomads and the local population here is the language barrier. Yeah. And this is something that could be completely broken down in these communities within a generation. It can happen quicker than that, but if you actually made a community initiative that a language exchange initiative over a generation, that could make the whole thing. If all the locals spoke English and all the digital nomads had the opportunity to learn the local language in an environment that fostered cultural compatibility and cultural understanding, that would do a huge thing, because then suddenly, I'm in the remote working business for basically English-speaking jobs, basically, and I think people who can work those jobs, and we need a certain level of communication. So the reason we're so successful in South Africa is because that exists there as at a native-speaking level, despite the fact the place has lots of languages around. English is the standard language, so we can just go and hire people there, put them on the phone with Americans, and they do great. In Asia, that's not the case. And so for opportunity to spread, there needs to be a certain cultural compatibility, and that unfortunately means that they have to learn the global language English, or another functional global language, international language that would provide them access to employment, and then you sort of have a leveling factor. For example, in Eastern Europe, lots of people speak English and maybe German and other languages like Spanish, so they're easy to hire and incorporate into the business thing. But where there's this huge gulf between the local language and customs and understanding and communication and stuff like that, it's hard to integrate on that level, and it's hard to have this sort of trickle-down effect from digital nomads moving that you can have in a place like Eastern Europe or South Africa. But then again, it kind of reminds you of this the imperial efforts of basically the Austro-Hungarian Ottoman empires, where if you learned Turkish or German, respectively, you would have much greater access to life in that society, and it's just a simple fact of life, and that is how it works. But and then you look at colonies that were more brutal about it. Empires that were more brutal about actually destroying the local languages, and I think we can all agree that's what we don't want to see. To offer more to people who learn the international language of the people who are coming and inhabiting their country, can be very positive.
Yeah.
But to actually force out the local language is kind of a dark thing that we probably don't want to see again, because it happened in so many places in the world so many times, and we lost so much culture and oral history in that process.
Like the thing about, like, to go back to the whole colonialism debate again, like colonialism doesn't necessarily need to be one power or one group of people imposing their will upon the subjects, so there's not necessarily I'm making you learn English, but there's also kind of the fact that people around the world really should learn English in order to kind of compete in the global economy, is also kind of this expression of power. Like, they don't need to learn English, but if they actually want to have create maybe a better life for themselves, they need to, and that is an expression of power. And so that is still maybe falling within the colonialism kind of paradigm. People could kind of use that as a justification for why what we're seeing is a form of imperialism or colonialism, because we're making people, we're not making them, but we're saying, okay, if you want to play with us, you need to play by these rules, and these are our rules. And these rules kind of serve us as well. And they serve you, but they primarily serve us, the people with the power, with the language already.
But I mean, it's not going to stop. And it's also going to come from different directions. I mean, whatever influence Westerners have in a place like this, there's also going to be a lot of places in Southeast Asia that are getting investment from China and getting, migrations from China. And China has, a similar sort of, let's say, cultural blinders on when they go into a place like that we do. Like, insensitive to local culture. We do business our way. We want you to fit into that, and it's just it's a food chain of cultures, essentially.
And like, colonialism's always been kind of colonial powers kind of competing against each other.
But this happens everywhere in the world. Everywhere. If you look at the way that prestige dialects work in a certain language, what I mean is, like, you have a whole country like Thailand, and people from Bangkok linguistically dominate, and their dialect would be what's taught in the schools and stuff like that as proper Thai or something, and the people in Isan province in northern Thailand are told that the way they actually speak to each other is less important. This has been happening. It's the same in France, Germany, England, everywhere. So this sort of geographical dominance of more affluent groups over less affluent groups, and more urban groups over more rural groups, is nothing new at all. We're just doing it in a strange, new, location-independent way that looks really innocent. A bunch of travelers finding a beach they like, settling down and setting down roots, but the new thing is beaming in money from abroad and not really having to integrate very much at all.
Like, I read this really cool quote about basically colonialism is inevitable because we live on a finite planet. We live on a certain amount of space, and we are all living here together. So eventually we're going to come into each other's spaces because there's nowhere else to go unless we kind of, colonize Mars and everything. So it's inevitable. But the question is, what is the quality of that colonialism? What is the quality of this power relationship? And I think that's where we can maybe, I agree it's inevitable, but maybe we can make it more just, more equitable, more fair, try to help everyone kind of move up. At the same time, if you think about the logics of the lifestyle and what makes Thailand such a great destination for tourism and for nomads, it's because it's a country that's cheap.
Yeah.
And it's because the country is built on relatively cheap labor.
And because it's welcoming.
And it's welcoming. But you can see how in one sense there can be an argument to be made that we don't really want the standard of let's say the wage levels here to increase, because if that increases, Thailand stops becoming that attractive cheap destination to us.
Yeah.
And so we have this tension now between, okay, we want to have a great quality of life, and that's why maybe we move to countries in the global south to kind of maximize the value of our currency.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that may be making the quality of life of the locals lower. So now we have this tension between, you know, what is good for one group of people and the pursuit of that good negatively affecting the locals. Where do we draw that line? How do we balance
Yeah,
that?
it's like there's arguments on all sides of it. Like, oh my God, this restaurant catering to Europeans charges 200 baht for Thai food when you can get it for 50, 70 baht at the street food stall. Oh my God, look at these rent prices catering to Europeans. They're 4 times as much as the local and stuff like that. And then you could also see people criticizing the fact that you're coming and getting these cheap prices, and you know, like when you can really afford a lot more and all this sort of stuff. There's just so much argument, and I mean, I think, first of all, everybody should come and do their thing on the budget that they have. Be generous to the local people and respectful tip them and stuff like that. But it's just like all of this moralizing over it. I mean, I think we should less focus on like principles of injustice and more focus on principles of kindness and connection with local communities and how we can actually philosophically look at the impact. Look at the impact that you're having on local business and stuff and all that sort of stuff. Like, but think of how you can innovate your approach to this lifestyle to contribute more to both the community of nomads, which is largely a plug-and-play community where a lot of these people don't have these conversations with each other. Everybody's so individualist and jumps into it, but also the communities that you're in. Like, we'll see lots and lots more about this, and just be sensitive to the impact. Like, just see what it does. And over the coming years, we don't have the answers, folks. We're just watching this sort of thing evolve at an incredibly rapid rate, especially over the last 3 years since the COVID thing made remote working mainstream. So we're going to see over the next few years what it looks like. But guys, tell us in the comments, like, what did this video bring up for you? Because there's a huge discussion to be had about this, and you might have some examples and things that you find irritating or true that we didn't even mention here. So thanks a lot, guys. Subscribe to the Rising Nomad channel. Look in the description for Shaun's info if you want to see his work and papers and stuff like that, and we'll catch you later. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, man.
Yeah.